Association. Thanks everybody for signing and dialing in today. If you're not familiar, the Minnesota Retailers Association is simply a collection of innovative retailers across the state, many with a Minneapolis business presence as well. It's really my pleasure to be one of many hosts for today's Minneapolis Crime Plan briefing with Mayor Jacob Fry and Director of Economic and Inclusion Policy, Director Sean Pierce, in partnership with many organizations, including the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, the Southwest Business Association, Metro IBA, the Warehouse District Business Association, Lake Street Council, Uptown Association, the Minnesota Licensed Beverage Association, Easttown Business Partnership, New Loop Partners, the Convenience and Service Store Association, Hospitality Minnesota, and many others. And just again, a big thank you to partnering organizations on this, and mostly to all of you on as an organization, business, or nonprofit. We know you're working so hard to address consumer, employee, and neighborhood safety today, and thank you so much for that. It's my hope that today's event results in a strong understanding of the city's plan for dealing with violence and crime that we're seeing today, in addition to how the business community can be a part of that solution. We know that this topic is of interest to many, as evidenced by the more than 400 pre-registrations for this event. And again, I want to thank the mayor and Sean for being available for this event. I also want to thank Jonathan Weinhagen and the team at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. Jonathan's team, including Andrea Carver and Christine Levins and Kayla Collins, offered up the use of their technology today, including an additional investment given the size of our crowd, and we deeply appreciate that. In a moment, Jonathan will get us kicked off. I also want to thank my colleagues, Savannah Sepik and Matt Perry and Jessica Reinert at the Southwest Business Association, along with Joanne Kaufman at the Warehouse Business District Association for their pivotal role in this. And last but not least, Zach Farley and the Mayor's Office for helping put this together. As Christine mentioned, from a format perspective, Jonathan will get us kicked off shortly with our special guest today. Joanne will facilitate Q&A. Again, given the size of our group, we may not be able to efficiently get through all those questions and answers, but we'll do our very, very best. And as Christine mentioned, you can use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to take care of that. We have a pretty hard stop at about 1:45 today, so we'll try to get right into it. With that, it's really my pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, Jonathan Weinhagen.
Hey, thank you, Bruce, and thanks to all of our partners who helped pull this together. And I would echo the appreciation to all of you who are taking some time this afternoon on a beautiful summer day to learn and invest in our city further than you already do, and would echo Bruce's sentiments with a thank you to all that you do every day, making investments, creating jobs and opportunities for folks across our region. I think we can all agree that the first half of 2020 was interesting, and I mean that in the very most Minnesotan sense of the word. Global pandemic that literally brought our economy to a halt, followed by civil unrest that devastated every corner of our city. This time of year, we're typically seeing a little bit of an uptick in crime as we head into summer, but I think many of us can agree that it feels a little bit different this year. We're fortunate today to have Mayor Fry and Sean Pierce from his office to provide some insights into the current state of what they're seeing and hearing and some of the data, as well as an overview of the plan that is underway to combat crime and violence that we're experiencing in the city, as well as answer your questions that you have, and really learn how we can be an even stronger partner. I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on the partnership that the business community has had with the mayor's office. I would say we have no greater champion than Mayor Jacob Fry to help respond to the needs of the business community. So appreciate the work and the open lines of communication and your willingness to be here today, Mayor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor and to Sean Pierce. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan Weinhagen and the Regional Chamber of Commerce. You are right. You have been stupendous partners throughout. You really get to see organizations and individuals that step up during times of crisis, and to be frank, those that do not. And you have stepped up every single time. And Bruce, thank you for orchestrating this, making sure that the Minnesota retailers are included and informed. And you've been a wonderful partner as well. And to all of those on the call, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I know that these crises, sandwiched upon crises, have been troublesome or interesting, I believe, as Jonathan said, to say the least, and at times they've been quite damaging. I understand and appreciate that fully, and I'm so sorry that you've had to go through this pandemic on top of the unrest. I know it's been tough, but you all have shown your mettle, and you've stepped up in so many different ways, notwithstanding the difficulty that you're going through, and I just want to say thank you. So, I don't want to reflect too long on where we've come from, both with the pandemic and the unrest, but I want to make sure it's at the very least addressed and acknowledge what I think many of the businesses on here are going through. The pandemic hit at some point in March, at least in terms of the regulatory impact. Many businesses have been closed in full since then. We've obviously started a partial opening, making sure to turn that dial ever so slowly. And we've seen other states ranging from Florida to Texas that have seen dramatic spikes. And I think in part because they did not take the more conservative approach that we did. We were certain to, introduce masks fairly early on. We did close down bars and restaurants very early as well. And I think that closure in Minneapolis has helped to stem the tide of infections that have been going up dramatically in other states. Not to mention, it gave us the time. It gave us the time to make sure that we had the right number of ICUs set up, the right number of hospital beds and ventilators and respirators and PPE. And getting that additional time, I think, did and will save lives. And we fully acknowledge that, there is a balance there in that we also need to be able to have our economy function, and we need to get people back to work. And so, as we move forward in terms of the pandemic, we want to do so with a keen eye for both the health impacts as well as the economic impacts. And then, of course, there was the tragic killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. And the unrest that followed was not something that anybody anticipated necessarily, but I think is something that has perhaps been a product of some of these systemic inequities for a long time. And I want to be very clear. I am a big proponent of First Amendment speech and your constitutional right to both assemble as well as voice your opinion. But when those First Amendment rights begin to infringe on someone else's nose, when those constitutional rights go to looting and burning, it's unacceptable in every form. That's where I stand. And this was a guard-sized crisis, and in fact, as we saw, it really deserved a guard-sized response. And once we had the full mobilization of the National Guard, which is something that we haven't seen since World War II, it was a dramatically different result. Now, since then, and since the end of what I would call the unrest, which, by the way, had really minimal lost life. In fact, there was only one. Since then, we have had a series of shootings and an uptick in violence that surpasses what we were experiencing last summer significantly. So I want to be clear. Yes, we always do see an uptick in violence and shootings going into every summer. That I don't want to call it a given, but that has been fairly routine as we've seen over the last several years. What is not normal and what should not be accepted in any way, shape, or form is the violence that we've seen in the uptick. Any form is unacceptable. So we have undergone several strategies around the uptick in both shootings and violent crime, and that I will include muggings and assault in that as well. And I've been working very closely with Chief Arredondo around a plan of attack, and there are several things that are underway. One, yes, we do have additional officers that are working, in fact, overtime during many shifts, especially those when we can anticipate some form of violent activity. Second, we have called in assistance in many instances from other surrounding jurisdictions, both locally but also national. On the local front, we've been utilizing assistance from the Hennepin County Sheriff, from corrections, from probation, and as well as Hennepin County Intelligence to supplement some of the work that is already done by our own investigators. We've asked for assistance from the FBI as well as the Secret Service on the federal level. We're in very close coordination as well with our Metro Transit officers, and at times have state troopers that are assisting on the highways to make sure that we're managing both inflow and outflow. And we're making sure to have a very flexible team that is able to respond to emergencies as they take place. And I want to be very clear that our officers are working hard right now. And there are instances in which they are going into situations which are dangerous and sometimes untenable. We've seen instances over the last couple of weeks where officers are responding to some form of violent activity in which there is a clear victim. And just helping the victim has been a struggle, as soon as they arrive, they're surrounded and are pelted with things ranging from rocks to bottles. And so I am appreciative of their work. I also want to be clear that I stand by my calls for full structural reform in terms of how the police department operates. Both of these things are true. We can hold in our hearts these two truths at the same time. One being, we need structural change. We need a full-on culture shift in terms of how our police department operates, and we do need law enforcement and police. There are situations that happen in our city ranging from domestic assaults to shootings where we need officers to be able to respond. And you know, I'm very much for having a response that goes beyond simple police response. In other words, public safety beyond policing is something that I very much favor. We've instituted a mental health co-response that goes citywide, where a co-responder will go along with an officer. I'll note that co-responder, the co-responding team does not want to go without the officer, noting that they do not know what the situation will present before they're actually there. We are working with social workers as well to see how they could potentially respond. But again, I want to be clear, we still do need officer response. In addition to that officer response, we are working with several community-led organizations ranging from Mad Dad to A Mother's Love to many of our Black churches in North Minneapolis, making sure that our chief is in very close contact with them. And they have these relationships on the ground to ensure that we can heed off some of these problematic activities before they start. We also have a program that is called GVI, Group or Gang Violence Initiative. A lot of the shootings that we've seen have been the product of either gang activity or gang or group retaliation. And what GVI is set up to do is have one, community partners instilled in the process, and two, we have these call-ins where we quite literally bring in individuals that have been associated with group-involved activity in the past. We say, look, you're at a crossroads right now. You can either go down the route where you put down the guns, you stop this violent activity, and we will give you every possible resource that you need, whether that's housing or assistance or a job. The mayor's office will get behind you. Hennepin County will get behind you, and we'll help you out. However, if you don't put down the guns, there are serious consequences to it, and we will target the most violent gang, most violent group, and the group that also shoots first. And so it's a very clear crossroads that we present, and we've got Sasha Cotton, who is our Director of Violence Prevention, that is focusing very much on those efforts, in addition to some of this community work where we have community members themselves that are investing their time and energy to stop some of this violent crime before it happens. You know, I have a feeling that I'll get questions on this, but I feel that I should probably just state very clearly my position on the charter amendment that is coming forward in some form, as I'm sure that will be a topic. Again, I am for a full structural reform in terms of how our department operates. I am for a culture shift in how our department operates. Let me be clear what I mean by that. When you talk about culture, we're talking about personnel. We're talking about people. And that means the ability to get the right officers in and retain officers that have this integrity and compassion instilled by our chief from the very beginning. And it also means the ability to get the wrong officers out. And right now, when we terminate or discipline an officer, they'll go through a bureaucratic process. They deal with both the police union, the collective bargaining agreement, and then it goes up to an arbitration at the state level. And at that arbitration, as much as 45 or more, 45% of the cases are then returned right back to the police department. So about half the time, at least, when an individual is terminated or disciplined, the decision is ultimately overturned, at least in part. And that's problematic because it prevents our chief and myself from making the necessary culture change that we want. There's many other policy items that we are working on, but I want to be clear that culture eats policy for breakfast, and culture is going to be key. Now, I'm for that culture shift. What I am not for is an ambiguous question that may or may not result in an absence of officers. The charter amendment as it's proposed, there's a whole lot that I don't know. And I don't know not because of what any council member has or has not said. I don't know because I've read the language. Under the language itself, it is unclear whether there will be police officers or not. There may be a division with law enforcement. There may not be a division for law enforcement. And so even if you are for getting rid of the police, this is not a smart thing to put on the ballot because it is entirely ambiguous. It is one of those situations where, those choose your own adventure stories where the public gets to choose the very first question and the first direction, and then the council and other people choose the remaining 99. I don't think that's a good form of governance, and having that level of uncertainty literally instilled in our city's constitution, in our charter, is not smart. The one thing that is clear is the reporting structure. And right now, before any charter is passed, when something goes wrong, there is accountability in that it's very clear who is responsible and who is accountable. It's Chief Arredondo and myself. That accountability, I think, is essential. What you can't have during crises or really any time, especially with regard to public safety, is a lack of accountability or ambiguity in terms of who is in control. You cannot have that, especially with police officers, especially during times of crisis, especially in matters of public safety. Under the proposal, the accountability would shift from, rather than just be Chief Arredondo and myself, where the chief just reports to me, the chief would have to ultimately, the head of public safety, I would say, would have to report to 14 individuals, 13 council members and myself. That dilutes accountability. It's a finger-pointing contest and opens us up to the situation where we have different policing models and different forms of accountability depending on the ward in which you're in. That's not smart governance for the city. And so I think it's ambiguous in some parts. I think it's unambiguous in others, but just going in the wrong direction. And I do not support the direction as of right now, but I am for that structural change. I'm going to stop there, as I know I've been talking for a bit here. I will answer any additional questions that you had that may be specific to your corridor, specific to your neighborhood. And to the extent that I can't get the questions, we can have one of our Minneapolis Police Administration follow up with you. But again, thank you so much, Bruce, for hosting, to the retailers. Thank you, Jonathan, for all the work you're doing. And thank you to all of our business partners that are on the call.
Thank you, Mayor Fry, and thank you for being here today. One of the questions that came through was, how can community-based mental health providers like the Family Partnership that are rooted in our neighborhoods get involved in the planning for reforms that hopefully will include mental health crises responses?
We would love to have the Family Partnership involved. I think that's an excellent idea. one of the best ways is to loop them into one of a couple of different community processes that are presently happening. And I would have Jen White from my staff reach out to them. And so Sean, if you could connect Jen with the family partnership and any others that are interested in getting involved in that capacity, that would be great. Because, mental health is a significant, some form of mental health responses is a significant number of the 911 calls that come in. The dilemma is, of course, you don't know what percentage or what specific mental health calls require an officer from the get-go and which do not. I'm well aware that there are many, many, many instances in which an officer is not required. And assuming we could just send out some form of co-responder, that would be great. Sometimes it's difficult to decipher on the immediate 911 call itself. But yes, so we will make sure to make that connection. Joanne, if you could forward any necessary contact over to, you've got Jen's number, or
Yes,
Jen's contact. Let's just do that.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
I just dropped Jen's contact information in the chat for everyone as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, and our next question is, let's see, what do we have here? We've got quite a few. And let's see. Can you expand on the law enforcement partnerships in place today with the county, state, FBI, et cetera, and how will that quiet or temper some of the violence that we're seeing?
Thank you for the question. I can't expand dramatically on it. So depending on so we have several partnerships in place. We have partnerships that are in place like as of right now. In other words, they are in effect. We also have additional resources and people that we can call on if necessary. So if necessary, we can call on what's called a mutual aid response that would bring in other surrounding jurisdictions to combat and to deal with some of the violence that we're seeing along certain corridors or in our city. Additionally, we have assistance that is in some form ongoing. And so the forms of assistance that is presently ongoing would be the partnership with the sheriff in Hennepin County. It would be the additional assistance from, of course, corrections and from intelligence. The chief is, right now we have some additional support as well from both the Secret Service as well as the FBI, and that helps in the form of investigations as so much of a lot of case time is reflected not just in a cop going out to a situation, but then the follow-up afterwards. And if we can get additional support, it helps us to it alleviates pressure elsewhere. I know that the chief as well has been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that also helps to expedite some of the judicial processes to make sure that we're handling these things right and fairly, but also that we're able to have accountability. So, if there are specific areas that you have questions about and kind of what each one of these individual jurisdictions do, I'm happy to answer. But it is an additional assistance and one that we do in fact need.
Thank you. What additional resources are needed to implement the plan outlined, and a future plan that adds in social workers, et cetera? And then what can we as a business community do to help? We want to be a good partner. We obviously have a stake in all of this, and we want to be as helpful as we can.
So we will need additional resources, obviously. And let me start by saying the truth, which is that given COVID-19, but also the unrest, we do have some significant budget shortfalls. Prior to George Floyd, we were looking at around $200 million worth of revenue shortfalls this year. And that stems from what all of you are already seeing, which is that on a normal weekday, we see our city balloon by as much as 50%. It's people coming from all over the state, whether it's to downtown or uptown or wherever. They come to Minneapolis. They use water. They pay utility fees. They go out to get a beer. They pay entertainment or liquor taxes. They have dinner afterwards. They go to a Twins game. They get a hotel room. All of these things have an impact. And the reason Minneapolis's budget as a whole is dramatically larger than, for instance, St. Paul's budget. And it's only in small part due to our residential population being larger than theirs. Most of it stems from the fact that we have monies and resources coming in from far more commerce. And in some cases, those revenues were decimated. That being said, yes, we do have plans right now that we're working through to determine how a police response can be supplemented and enhanced and more compassionate with other resources in addition. And that comes in the form of social workers. And that comes in the form of these mental health co-responders that I mentioned earlier. That comes in the form of community outreach partners that are also funded through the city. And so, we are saying, so if the question is, how do you assist in terms of the funding of some of these additional outreach efforts, easily we could get you in contact with, once again, Jen, who can give you alternates as to how you can be supportive there. If you are interested in doing some of this work, the safety beyond policing work yourself or through your organization, once again, we can loop you in as well. So there's going to be a bunch of different areas. One thing that has become really clear to me, though, is the response in whatever form it takes needs to be very coordinated. If we lose the structure of the system, we lose the ability to respond in real time, which on many of these safety measures is essential.
Thank you. Another question came in about what we're going to see now in terms of police protection during this period while these changes in the structure are taking place. And I'm wondering if you can address that, please.
I want to be very clear here that Chief Arredondo and I are committed to the public safety in our city. That may sound like a macro cliche thing to say, but what I am saying is that I am absolutely committed to make sure that when you need help, when you need an officer in any form, when you need a mental health co-responder in any form, we are able to provide those resources to you. And so, yes, there has been unrest over the last month in many forms. Yes, there has been an uptick in shooting and violence, and I think it's important to acknowledge that and just be honest. But over the next several months, the response with respect to our officers, the ability to respond to 911 calls and have officers on duty, it's not changing. It will not change. There obviously are logistics that we need to work out. And I can't quite predict the future with respect to the next steps of this proposed charter amendment. But, at least my interactions with community at large has been that people want change. They want structural change to how our police department operates. They also want the ability to call 911 and to have an officer respond during a time of emergency.
Thank you. Another question came in about the cost to the city for these added agencies and overtime for the current police and how that factors into the upcoming budget. The concern is that the safety part of the budget will be slashed at a time when there's a spike in violence.
The assistance from the outside agencies in some instances costs nothing. It's just a partnership that we have that is ongoing. In other cases, we do provide monetary support to community groups like Mother's Love or Mad Dads. The overtime, obviously, yes, overtime is an expense and one that we're going to have to deal with in the budget. And everybody was working overtime. I mean, people were working 20 hours a day for a whole week there, basically. And so there will be an impact. I can't quite predict how the budget process will go. But what I can tell you is that there's going to be two segments of it. There's, complete and final adoption of our 2020 amended budget, which we had to amend due to resource shortfall due to COVID-19. And then there's the 2021 budget, which will be presented in part in some time in August. So that, again, would apply to next year. All the while, let me be clear, we still have new recruiting classes coming in to our police department. The additional recruiting class that we added as part of last year's budget, or I would say this year, it was adopted last year, but is this year's budget, they are going through the process right now, and then will come online. And that will help as well compensate for some of the attrition that we're seeing.
Thank you. Another question that came in was about the what we're seeing happening in the parks and what the city's plan is with that. We know that the park board, what their position is currently.
So with respect to the parks, I first want to acknowledge the at least partial independence of the park board and how they operate. I do not agree with the decision that they made last night, to be very clear. These issues are very, very complex. And we as a city do not have the resources to, or even if we did have the resources, the ability to immediately establish 600 units worth of not just deeply affordable housing, but deeply affordable housing with wraparound services to accommodate the influx of people that we're seeing coming into our city and who have already been unsheltered previously in our city. We have obviously an encampment that has grown quite large over at Powderhorn. There was an initial executive order issued by the governor that prevented cities around the state from managing encampments. It prevented us from, we had a very good system in place dating back to about 2 years ago when we had a significant encampment over on Hiawatha and Franklin. That was followed by a navigation center that saw positive results go from 15%. If going through a shelter, you have about 15% positive outcomes for people in shelters on an annual basis. Coming through the navigation center, we had about a 50% positive outcome rate. And then after that, we had a system in place where we had a really good coordination with the county where we would manage the size. Size in part, literally the size, the number of tents at an encampment can contribute to safety concerns. The safety concerns, the assaults, the human trafficking and drug trafficking that you would see at a 50 or 60 or 70 tent encampment is dramatically different from what you would see in a 6 or a 7 tent encampment. So in other words, the size itself oftentimes brings bad activity. And so there was an emergency order issued by the state that said that we couldn't manage in those forms encampments. We then sent a letter out. It was signed by myself and Mayor Carter and Ramsey County, Hennepin County, all of us, saying that we needed the ability to manage the encampments in some way. The order was changed. They amended it, but we've still had some issues since then. And I'll let Superintendent Al Bangora speak for himself, but I know he had issued an emergency. It was basically an order to evict or an order to leave the encampment over at Powderhorn when it was still quite small, in the range of 10 to 20 tents. And he was instructed, at least in some form, I wasn't on the call, but he was instructed in some form that he had to change it to allow for it to take place. And since then, obviously, the encampment has grown to an untenable size. And right now, we're in constant conversations with Hennepin County, as well as the state, as to figuring out next steps. What I'll tell you right now is that in its present state and in the direction that it's going, it's not safe. And the truth is that there is an infinite need for service. There is an infinite need for affordable housing. And the more that we do in Minneapolis, and by the way, we're doing exponentially more than any other city in the state by a long shot. And the more we do, the more people we then see come to some of these encampments. And so what we can't have is we have a system that is in place, and we don't want to send, we want to help. We also don't want to send a message that if you simply pop up an encampment, you get immediate housing, where there's many, many other people in our shelter system that have been waiting.
Thank you. And I think we have time for just one final question. The hotel community is now having very hard conversations with local, regional, and national meeting planners, and the feedback that they're getting, as well as businesses located throughout the city, is that they're concerned for the safety of their attendees coming into our city and going to events. What are some of the plans and actions to make sure that the broader public is confident that Minneapolis is a safe place to come, specifically downtown?
Well, I know that the Convention and Visitors Bureau, I know that anyone who does work in the tourism industry has been hit particularly hard, first due to COVID-19, and secondly, we do need to tell the story about who we are as a city, and that story, yes, includes what happened. It includes the killing of George Floyd, but it also includes some extraordinary people and culture and thriving business activity that happens in our city that needs to be, that story needs to be told. I know I've been talking with Jonathan a whole lot about, the brand of Minneapolis and what we do from here and how we take those collective efforts, how we harness all of that sadness and grief and pain and channel it into, yes, change, and also defining who we are as a people and who we are as a city. And that is going to be a big part. And, we are not, we are a safe city. We are a safe city that has had huge issues over the last month, certainly. And I'm sure you could probably argue that it has been before that as well. And so you could certainly argue that. And so what I would say is that we're going to get through this. Has there been an uptick? Yes, there has. I'm not going to deny it. Are we doing everything possible to making sure that we have order in our city and that businesses can open and thrive and do not need to fall victim to some of the activity that's happening in their business or on the street? We're doing everything possible that we can right now. And I think we'll be able to tell that story as we move forward. I think you're on mute there, Joanne.
Thank you. I was. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Frey.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your time today. Sean, thanks for all your work in the community. Maybe one last just purely practical question. I know I work with a lot of retailers that are struggling a little bit with response times and those types of things. What's your best advice relative to, cycling back with the police department or other officials there relative to just sort of renewing some of those good connections and kind of trying to get things reset from a response time perspective?
I think there's two pieces, Bruce, and thank you all for the questions. The first is that there have been a lot of really positive, long-standing relationships that have been established over time before my tenure between businesses and the police officers that protect and serve. And I think a reestablishing of some of those relationships, especially right now, is really critical. For these last few weeks to month, the ability to make that direct personal contact, I realize, has not just been limited, it's been impossible because of the workload that has been placed on our officers, on our firefighters, on really our entire city enterprise. But as we move forward in the coming months and through the summer and into the fall, what we need to do very quickly is make those reconnections. And so to the extent that you have, like, I want to make sure that our officers are coming through your specific corridor and saying, hello, here's my regular beat. Here's when I'll be working. I want you to know my face and my name. And those relationships are going to be very fruitful, I think. And in many cases, I know you even have some of their cell phone numbers. Make those connections, keep them, and I will make sure to instruct our MPD to be doing that as soon as possible. I know I don't need to tell you this, but yes, keep calling 911. To the extent that you have an emergency that requires you to call 911, please do. If it is a non-emergency situation, call 311. Although we presently have a hiring freeze on citywide employees to accommodate for the shortfall in the budget, both 911 operators as well as 311 have in many instances been bolstered even further. So you will be able to get that call through. And I think that is an immediate route that you can take. And Bruce, if I could just sort of finish up and just say thank you to everybody, if that is in fact the last question. I understand how difficult these times have been. I really do. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart that despite all of this difficulty, all of you have found a way to persevere. Whether it was the morning after some of the unrest, getting out there with a broom or a mop and helping to clean things up, or it was making sure that your employees were protected and had enough money to get through during times of COVID-19. And in some cases, it meant shutting down the business temporarily or in full for a period of time to protect the health of our city. You all have taken great pains to do the right thing by Minneapolis, and I want to make very clear that I will take great pains to do right by you. This has not been easy, and the next several months won't be easy either, but we're going to weather this wave together. We are going to get through. And I'm a believer that in 10 and 15 and 20 years from now, we can look back at this time period and this can either be like the time when we just sort of sat on our hands and continued business as usual, or we can make that shift in mentality and we could rise up united in purpose and really define who we are as a city. You all are going to be part of that, and I'm behind you 100%.
Mr. Mayor, thanks for acknowledging
Thank
the work the employers are doing and the partnership that we have with the city. And hopefully we saw that businesses, employers are willing to step up when they need to and do the right thing in partnership with the city. But thank you for your leadership. Sean, thank you for those. I know there's a lot of challenges. I know you're navigating a lot of those challenges. Thanks for the open line of communication today. I know we actually have a bunch of questions that we didn't get to. So those of you on that we didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry about that. We'll try to cycle back on those. But again, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your time and again, openness to the conversation. Everybody on the call, have a safe day. Have a great, safe 4th of July weekend. A couple quick notes. If you are one of those small businesses under 50 employers, the state grant program is open for a few more hours on that $10,000 state grant. You can find that through the deed portal. Do put your application in the ring for that if you qualify. But do have a safe 4th of July weekend. Do your best to keep your businesses safe, your employees safe, and your customers safe, not only among violence, but also among the COVID pandemic. So thanks so much today. Thanks for all of our partners for coming on as well. We hope everybody has a great, safe day, and we'll connect soon. Thank you.